It began as any other afternoon. I returned home from one of those days. The fitness center, exhausted and in a state of in dire need of a bath. The home was terrifying. Peace and quiet, and when I entered, I saw that I was alone with my sister and parents. It was only me, nothing out of the ordinary. That this has persisted for quite some time. At the demise of my father 5 years ago, I got used to a quieter home. To be honest, I wasn't that bothered by it. Was just the way things were. Business as usual. I made a beeline for the restroom, experiencing the heat of the exercise, forming a sticky film on my skin, but was in a rush. I neglected to take any change of clothing for when I get out of the shower. Felt no concern, even though nobody was at home. I figured, why not? I'll finish in a few minutes before they leave without returning for in the midst of which I tossed my garments through the front door and onto the nice to use the hot water in the restroom, removing the mystery of my exercise, and I ended up spending more time than typical as I'm in the shower enjoying the music. I did not hastily assume that I had several hours to relax, but I had no idea that the clock was about to make an unexpected turn when I at last dried off and went out of the shower. Leaving the house naked, I was unclothed and captured whole. Unexpectedly, I made my way back into the living room, anticipating a peaceful home, quite as vacant as it had been upon my arrival. Rather of mentioning that my mom and sister perched on the sofa, gazing. It shocked me almost as much as seeing them. I was in the living room, where I slipped from my body only a few seconds ago. I felt my heart cease beating suddenly. Just for an instant, we were paralyzed in the uncomfortable situation I hadn't anticipated. It's safe to assume that nobody will be home. While I am completely nude, sneak up on them. A seemingly endless period of stillness ensued. Indefinitely, and I could make out the shock, and maybe even a bit shocking. They made it so I couldn't make a single phrase. I snatched my garments in the quickest, terrifying, humiliated, and terrified I'd ever experienced. I hurriedly made my way to my chamber, flushed fiery crimson from the most unsettling and distressing incident that occurred in my life In a state of panic, I secured the door's lock. Is still trying to make sense of what occurred, and I started to wonder what I might have done differently. Was quite inattentive. I was disgusted, and even if my loved ones were remaining upright after the humiliation, even after a week, it hasn't completely disappeared. The time after that humiliating incident and nevertheless, I managed to persuade myself that was okay. I rationalized by thinking that maybe hadn't recalled or had already moved on from it. Yes, there was that uncomfortable moment. Circumstance and living things tend to normalcy restored, but despite my best efforts to go beyond it, there was an issue. A residue of anything that failed to settle. I completely agree. It was as if an unstated. There's a hint of something lingering, similar to a shadow that lingered, and after seeing my sister's behavior recently, I began to question if it's possible that they had really forgotten, or that I was alone in my room and they hadn't. Entranced by the film's simulated environment throughout the game, where I was doing button presses, tapping, and the exhilaration of gameplay engulfed my surroundings, providing a little break from the uncomfortable that I wasn't able to escape, pondering the events of the past before the sound of the door creak. As I swiveled around to see my sister standing, her expression betrays a playful mischief as when I ushered her into the room during a brief grin, somewhat anticipating her to begin discussing a very other topic, irrelevant as per normal, but this time around, Only conversing, she began to playfully engage, her infectious laughter resonating through the room as she made fun of me for no good reason, like she seemed to be doing it without malice every time. First, it was simply lighthearted conversation, have shared many times over the years, but there was a noticeable change in the manner. She was no longer only performing. She caresses me, whether we're joking or laughing. Reported feeling more often over. She seemed to be attempting to challenge myself to do things I wasn't. I was first under the impression that it was each characteristic of a typical sibling. Exciting, maybe she was only joking, as we often were as we helped one another develop. Growing up, we were always up for anything, from innocuous physical altercations to just enjoying ourselves while making lighthearted jokes. We formed a special link that brought us together, are at ease with, and linked, but as she drew nearer, her gliding delicately over my back or returned her gaze as she leaned in to speak, first sensations of uneasy, the physical contact wasn't hostile or unsuitable nonetheless. Seemed like it was more purposeful, more planned. More so than normal, I couldn't escape the sensation. Since then, something had changed. Maybe I was just giving it too much thought. Ultimately, my sister was still involved. While our bond had always been strong, I couldn't ignore the persistent little on the recesses of my consciousness that resulted in. That made me question if things had changed. Could I be hallucinating, or was there what she was attempting to convey? Her laugh subtly but surely persisted as she caressed had fun with my game and taunted me about it, but everything about the ambience had changed. Peace and contentment I had previously experienced seems to have been substituted with an unfamiliar discomfort, which I attempted to concentrate on the game, yet it was challenging to detach from the overwhelming sense of intense, as if she were attempting, so that we may discuss an issue that none of us had handled. The most difficult part, I was unsure of how. Debating whether I should pretend that nothing is happening, seemed as usual, as if nothing had changed, or would it have been wiser to deal with the problem in whatever the room's condition? Uneasy, the seconds ticked by. Began to have heightened feelings of insecurity. Attentive to each and every touch, look, my mind kept racing to the question of what was. Thinking about this and deciding whether did she just act naturally or if, regardless, a more fundamental factor was involved. Pressed on with my video game playing. Completely lost in the world of video games. Fixated on the TV, completely unaware of almost everything else in my immediate vicinity is. I never once felt her hand on my tool, and it was so subtle that I first believed it may have been a simple case of she often teased me with her touch. Time I become very engrossed in a video game, seeking to acquire a response, but the second time it occurred, I started to feel a little uneasy as time went on. By the third instance, her innocence was plain to see. With malice in her heart, raising her hand, remaining in an unsettling manner, completely unintentional, and then I ended myself leaving the game because I have to deal with it. Mia, cease and desist, yelled out as they retreated from the device. I turned to face her, my voice rising to hers. Arrived at a more audible and distinct pitch than I had anticipated. Meant, and the phrases seemed to cling to. Her expression changed from her customary, a mischievous grin disappearing into the void. Finally came to a resolution between us. I might see a shift in her, term that combines astonishment and, maybe, an ounce of pain. We were siblings subsequent to, connected by an intimate and carefree link that were founded on trust from the beginning and exuberance, but now I find myself. I could sense a heavy stillness Unfamiliar strain developing that was discomforting, as if an unseen threshold had been breached, and I abruptly began to doubt my assumptions. Right now, Jay, what's wrong? Breaking the stillness, she eventually inquired. Her mischievous grin is back, but this time it's more daring. Didn't notice before, couldn't spare, eh? With a hint of subtly daring in her tone, as if challenging me to face whatever had changed hands with me. The air was disappeared from her gaze and was replaced by an object. Decipher, so I paused to inhale deeply. Moment I steadied myself to confront her. You must have forget what you saw that fateful day, I murmured, unwaveringly attempting to sever the distress that I had hoped their remarks might cure. Convey to her the need of our having to forget about certain things that happened in the past. They were never intended to endure or evolve. Upon seeing us, she paused in her actions call, seeing me to seem insulted, posed with her arms crossed theatrically while, typical, she locked eyes with me. The mischief she had been displaying had vanished, replaced with an energetic but focused glare. What should I do to end it? Recall the sight of her teasing as she lifted an raised eyebrow while smirking and yanking at the I'd never seen the corner of her lips before. More substantial. Such a fantastic asset you possess. Huge deal, and you're my sibling. Wouldn't you want to come over and enjoy it with me? I'm ready to roll. Please, just give it a go. I stared. Unexpected, but her work was far from over. Obviously gave this a lot of attention. Furthermore, she inclined her head in the direction of. She was on the verge of landing the killer blow. Even Mom is interested in giving it a go, and my dad also didn't have as much hair. If you still have doubts, just ask her. Seemed so assured as she tossed in her favored strategy. She was aware of her mom's approval. That's quite hard for me to dispute. Shocked, I almost ran over to see my mom. Words are tripping me up, Mama. What the fuck? What on earth is she doing? Did she even mention it? That's when my voice faded out. As I attempted to absorb the news, I could see my mom was surprised by my reaction, but that is. She remained calm, let out a little laugh, and asserted that, in fact, she is correct. I'm 55 years old and, shockingly enough, this size is completely new to me. None of them till the day she arrived to. To me, her voice sounded kind but brimming with unwavering resolve. She gave me a hopeful, but wary, look. Her expression deteriorating, she urged him to continue. Here by your side, we're family, and we adore you. I hope you won't avoid being with us. Before proceeding, she inhaled deeply. Losing your father has been challenging. It's been 5 years since his death, and I've still responsible for keeping things running. Despite my best efforts, there are plenty of times when I feels overwhelmed and lonely at times. Myself, and I'd really benefit from having someone rely on a person who comprehends what I have missed you terribly, and I am aware that our dad would have preferred that we remain in close proximity to one another. She gazed, taking a brief pause as if collecting the guts to keep going, and then they tried again. Her tone had taken on an air of concern about your sister, who is almost 23 years old. Despite her youth, she has been having difficulty as well. She has never really had no one to lean on, no romantic partner, trustworthy pal she can depend on. Her voice became softer as she spoke, and alone. We aren't even going to ask her to squeeze my hand for a lot, and I guarantee you will love it. A sensation of kinship will wash over you. Once again, it's essential for everyone, and I think it's perfect for you as well. She fixed their gaze on me with a subtle intensity that caused everything to seem to stop moving, and the next thing you knew, she rushed to Her digits were on my shirt's hem. Slow but gradual descent under the cloth, raising it and placing it before. Knew what she was trying to say. Her shirt had disappeared and she was purposeful, yet there was a gentleness about the impression that she was relying on. Emotion that she didn't fully understand. Comprehend that my body froze and my thoughts raced. In an effort to deduce the nature of what seemed like my physical self was no longer able to respond to each delicate motion, she traced her fingertips, caressing my flesh as she angled her, as she swung her head from side to side, subconsciously conveying that I was having difficulty to unravel, and then she started unbuttoning her sleeve, her fingers swiping gently, almost painstakingly undid each button. No one ever looked away from me, and I could sense my pulse racing, my breathing choked. On the cusp of astonishment and fascination, I felt lost and uncertain about how to go. If there is anything I should mention, I failed to. No action could dispel the enchantment that had seized control of the space. A dreamlike setting as she persisted, engulfed us as if we were both weightless. At a time when language had no, in cases when deeds were more conclusive than every word we could utter, I would have wished to inquire about the situation and intended to get insight on the cause of this unexpected change, but I felt stifled when I tried to use my neck, and all I could do was observe her, stripped down to his underwear, and it seemed as if every step was very slowly and very quickly at the same time as, given that the very nature of time was all I could do was attempt to make sense of it, the unfolding events in order to comprehend the feelings whirling around in my mind. Mild skepticism, anxiety, everything was transpiring at once. In what seemed like an eternity, suspended in midair, releasing, that left me speechless and perplexed as soon as I saw them. Anything altered when I removed all of my garments. Within myself, whole world seemed to come to a standstill. Throughout the song, capturing my interest in each specifics of their exposed flesh, the manner as illuminated the gentle contours and lines that invited me to feel it. Took more than a moment. It was a gradual. I could feel the rising desire in my whole being, a need for shocked even ideas of moderation became less distinct as it faded into the distance. When an instinct with deeper roots become paramount, right then and there, the only thing that visible was the distance separating us from the strong attraction I had for them. My thoughts were flooded with pictures of how it may look, the feel, and the texture of their flesh under my knuckles. Warmth that seemed to permeate the air, steaming out of their bodies, a powerful magnetic pull that was exciting and using up all my energy and making me feel like I was poised on the brink of an impassable obstacle. Not to mention, but had a strong desire to. During the ordeal, I felt my heart racing swiftly, my breath becoming shallower as the will to close the gap in order to reach out and experience heightened. Any reasonable idea vanished to be replaced by a need that I had never before encountered with such ferocity prior to. Everything in the room seemed to dissolve into shadiness, reducing us to a trio. During this intense time, it wasn't just relating to the urge that was bodily, something more profound, a bond that seems bound to happen, as if each decision I were responsible for bringing me to this point. Instant, and inside that room, all I could consider whether the feeling was physical, as well as the power cord that is poised to may ignite our connection in an instance, without delay, plunging into accomplishing our three most ardent goals, seldom pausing to contemplate the potential. Each desire, every secret desire, must emerge from it. It seemed to have wriggled its way up to the top in need. Focus on the thrill and independence of. They were all using up like an enthralling swell that carried us away. Without regard to care or uncertainty, it was thrilling, enjoyable, especially when one disregards the typical whispers of wisdom and warning that may have prevented us from progressing. A strong windstorm engulfed us, forward impetus that propelled us along with any option. Know of how reckless that our choice was, fueling the idea that we were certain to succeed. Invincible, we were propelled by a combination of enthusiasm, impatience, and maybe even a hint of rebellion. Following all these aspirations were objects of our incessant daydreaming, fantasizing about the potential outcomes of our. We're bold enough to pursue them without any hold us back. And suddenly everything was starting to happen. Like if a vision had materialized, yet inside that haste, we failed to take ripple into account. Potential consequences that might become active when effects that might resurface in present us with uncertain repercussions. Faraway ideas, shadows we preferred to recognize far less. Tackle it seemed like the next step. Have time for. What was important was grabbing the momentary liberation, as if maybe for a little while, time will stand still for us, enough to allow us to savor that moment. At the time, every move seemed to have a rationale, essential, like an individual's DNA that was being revealed at last. Instead, we persisted in being propelled only by delight in discovering all that we were yearning to spread forward, while hearts, perspectives that are both open and closed to the what our choices might end up costing.